The collapse of the Chinese stock market obviously caused a great deal of turbulence in Western economies, North America and Europe in particular. I smile to myself when I say that because the capacity for recovery is almost instantaneous. You'll notice the North American stock market has had a surge of increased prices in the last 48 hours, and you'll also notice that the banks are showing greater profits and capitalism, blessed capitalism, has survived. But there's one part of the world where the decline in the Chinese economy will be felt most perversely, and that, of course, is the African continent. Why? Because China practically owns Africa at this point. It's emerged as the new neo-colonial power. China has loaned African governments billions upon billions of dollars, and it's engaged in huge infrastructure development in bridges and tunnels and railways and roads and hospitals and schools. China is the new colonial power in Africa. And that has terrible consequences for Africa, because if China cannot buy a sufficient amount of African commodities, and if China cannot loan the kind of money they were loaning before, then Africa could be in trouble. You see, the Western governments which have been funding Africa are cutting back. They're cutting back on foreign aid, and they're cutting back on support to treat diseases like HIV and AIDS. And Africa is not able to handle it. The very excellent Globe and Mail bureau chief in Africa, Jeffrey York, wrote a fascinating piece in the last couple of days indicating that there were contractions already being felt in a number of African economies. For example, the two biggest economies, South Africa and Nigeria, have predicted much lower rates of economic growth in the next year, and that will be calamitous for Africa. And the same is felt by countries as disparate as Botswana and Zimbabwe. If the West is pulling back and China can't permit the continued inflow of cash, then the money has to be generated within Africa itself, and the money isn't there. They are impoverished. Why doesn't Africa ever get a break? That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis. I'll be away next week, but when I return, I'll still be Stephen Lewis.